So, hello everybody, and welcome to Spring into Summer with Gloucestershire Moths. Before I start, a little confession. This is not the original recording that we did a couple of weeks ago. I had some technical issues with that. Basically, I ballsed it up. So I'm re-recording an abridged version with the highlights, which I hope you will enjoy just as much, even though it's missing Guy's section on micros. So, spring into summer. Thanks, Alan Titmarsh, for stealing my title for your TV programme, but that's okay. I'll see you in court. General content. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. General content is spring moths, moths that you might see in your garden, or if you're out on a walk in the woods, etc. We're going to have a bit of a top 10 countdown. So the most popular moths seen in mid-May. A little look at day flying moths. We're going to have a look at the Emperor Challenge, which is a little initiative that we've set up on the Gloucestershire Moths Facebook group. Another look at confusion species, and then wrap it all up with some gardening for moths and how you can attract moths to your garden. Right, so without further ado, let's get started. Anything about? To steal a birding term. Well, there we go. As a matter of fact, there is, or at least there should be. I've got to say, at the moment, through April and this early part of May, we've had the most horrendous weather for moths. Cool, clear nights. We're now suffering from a bit of rain and wind as well, and the moth species have been well down. That said, where we should be now is in a good place, and there are over 700 species that have been recorded in the county in the period around mid-May. That's that's an awful lot of moths, and it's double the species that you would see in April. And of course, that trend's going to continue to develop as the year goes on. Peaking in July, you probably get over 1,000 species have been recorded in the county. That's a heck of a lot of moths. And if I look at my own records over the past 5 years that I've been studying moths, I average about 150 species in my garden in May. The bulk of those attracted to light, but there are some day flyers in there, and 1 or 2 leaf mines as well. So in order to achieve that figure, I run a light trap on about 15 nights a month, certainly in May, and that works out sort of every other night. Sometimes I might do it on consecutive nights if we've got pretty good weather, and I might not trap for a week if the weather's awful. But I do like to try and give the moths a bit of a break in between trapping sessions. But you don't need a light trap to see moths. Anybody who follows our Facebook group will know that. We've got a number of recorders and observers who just leave an outside light on, and they get plenty of interesting species to that. And of course, there's day flyers too. There's an awful lot of moth species that you can see in the daytime in your garden, and certainly if you're out and about in the countryside. So we'll now do the top 10 countdown. These are the top 10 recorded moths in our county for the period of mid to late May. Now, I was going to do this countdown in a sort of cheesy 70s style DJ voice, but I thought that might quickly become grating. So instead, we'll just have a little bit of music to introduce it. Right, let's get started. Okay, so number 10 in the charts, we've got the aptly named Scalloped Hazel. Absolutely stunning moth, good sized triangular moth with those lovely scallops running along the bottom of the wings there. And identified also by the two crossbars across the middle of the wings. The larvae feed on deciduous shrubs, so they're not too fussy. And yeah, it's a lovely moth. Watch out for it. Easily attracted to light. Number 9, the common marbled carpet. An incredibly variable moth. I mean, really variable. Most don't even have the amount of white on that this particular moth has got. They tend to be, the more common varieties are sort of orangey brown colour, but as I said, incredibly variable. You're probably only going to confuse it with the dark marbled carpet, but that usually flies a little bit later in the summer. And the larvae, a bit like the previous moth, deciduous shrubs, but mainly sort of woody species, really. But very common moth this. Number 8, treble lines. Does what it says on the tin. It's got 3 lines on it. So chunky little moth. Overwinters as a larva, pretty easy to ID. It's got those three obvious lines in it. There is a darker form, but it's less common, and we won't get in that tonight. Larvae feed on herbaceous plants. Okay, number 7, the white ermine. So called because it looks like it's wearing an ermine collar or robe. It's also got this really bright yellow abdomen with dark spots. Now, you could confuse this particular moth with a female muslin, and we'll have a look at one of those a bit later on. The food, herbaceous plants again, so a bit of a pattern developing here, as you can see. Number 6, it's the pale tussock. Bit of a beast of a moth, this one. Funnily enough, I had one in my moth trap just 2 nights ago. This isn't a great identification photo, but I think it shows its true character. This moth rests with its legs in this elongated pose, the legs stretched out, and those legs are like Velcro. Female much bigger than the male in this species too, and the larvae feed on broad-leaved trees and shrubs. Great moth. Number 5, another carpet, pretty easy to identify. Green carpet, basically. These are, obviously so called because it's green, but you need to catch this moth fresh to see the bright green colours on it. Within a few days, that starts to wear, and a lot of these moths you see are almost white in colour. Also a day-flying moth. You'll see this if you're out and about in the woods, easily disturbed from brambles and places like that. More of a specialist feeder, this one. The larvae feed on bedstraws. Flame shoulder, rich reddish brown hue with bright straw-coloured bands running along the leading edge there. Supposed to have a pink suffusion on the leading edge as well, which someone decided looks like dying embers, hence the name. You might need to use your imagination a bit with that. And another herbaceous plants feeder. Number 4, number 3 even. Let's have a look. Okay, so number 3, shuttle-shaped dart. The males are brown or greyish brown with variegated forewings. and the female is dark brown or black. Both have these elongated darts on the wings. 2 generations of these a year, April through to October. Number 2, the muslin, as mentioned previously. As with the shuttle-shaped darts, these moths are sexually dimorphic. I mean, even easier to tell apart. The male's this brownish colour and the female white, with almost translucent wings. And she flies by day, the male flies by night. So you very rarely find the female in a moth trap. On the occasion of this photograph, that did actually happen. I had both in the trap, but that's a rare thing indeed. And yes, you guessed it, they feed on herbaceous plants too. So we're all getting very excited now about what's going to be number 1 in the charts, aren't we? Have any of you guessed? I'm sure you have. So here we go then. Yes, it's of course the brimstone. Also the name of a butterfly, but I think the moth is far cooler and definitely more handsome with those with that bright yellow and those dark brown marks along the edges of the forewings there. Very long flight period, April to October, well distributed. You can find it pretty much anywhere in the county, and often disturbed in the daytime too. The larvae like to feed on blackthorn, hawthorn, plums, rowan, wayfaring trees, quite a few plants. So great moth, number 1. Let's just have a look at its distribution. Okay, so these maps are from Guy Meredith's moth maps on the Gloucestershire Butterfly Conservation website. And we have a map like this for every species that's been recorded. Now, as far as the brimstone goes, you can see the distribution there. It is pretty much all over the county. Species recorded in 71 of the 2 kilometre squares in 2019. And 361 2 kilometre squares since the records started to be logged. So it's everywhere. If you don't see a brimstone moth, there's something wrong, frankly. So that's our top 10. But of course, there's a lot more moths around than just the top 10. Let's have a little look. So here's just a few of the moths that are likely to be on the wing around this period. Going clockwise from top left, we've got the swallow-tailed moth. And this is an absolutely fabulous moth. Reminds me of something out of the tropics. If you see one of these sort of flapping around the moth trap when you're out at night, it really is a sight to behold. Beautiful, beautiful moth. Next to that, you've got the buff tip. This is the moth that mimics a birch twig, as you can see. Quite common, but always a great find. Bottom left is clouded silver, not to be confused with silver cloud, but more of that later. And you can see this one flying in the daytime too. And then finally, we've got gold spot, a fine looking specimen that is. It always reminds me of a little jewel, really, or something like that. It's a great moth. And of course, at this time of year, the hawk moths start to appear as well. Some of our biggest moths. Again, going clockwise, we've got a small elephant hawk moth and elephant hawk moth together there, so you can see the size difference. The beast that is the privet hawk moth, which apparently is quite common, but I've never seen one. And it irks me because my garden is surrounded by privet hedgerows. and yet this this moth continues to elude me for some reason. But there we go. There's always something to look forward to. Down in the bottom left-hand corner there, you've got the eyed hawk moth. Flashes those wings to scare off predators. And of course, the popular hawk moth next to that, which is probably the most common on that page. That's another moth with Velcro for legs as well. Once attached to your finger, they're a devil of a job to get off. So, and I just thought I'd sort of round that section up with a county speciality as well. The silver cloud, as I said, not to be confused with the clouded silver. There's a lot of very similar moth names. So this is a specialist moth of the Severn Valley. So its heartland is Gloucestershire, runs up into Worcestershire and a little bit of Warwickshire. It's not really found anywhere else in the country. There's a few small colonies about. As you can see, there's a dark and a lighter form. Certainly where I am, the darker form tends to outnumber the lighter by about 8 to 1. But I don't know if that's the same for right across the patch. If you have a look at the map, it's quite interesting to compare that with the brimstone moth that we looked at before. As you can see, it's nowhere near as widespread, and it does tend to run down that Severn Valley there, which is its heartland. And then finally, we've got the pogs. Yeah, the dreaded pug family provide endless hours of entertainment for bewildered moth recorders, picking through near on identical ID features and getting absolutely nowhere. Perhaps that's just me. You get to the point where it's difficult to attempt to identify any but the most obvious. They've all got this same flattened out resting posture. And there's about 50 species in this group, so it's hard work. That said, I'll try and go through these 4 for you, just to give you a flavour. So in the top left-hand corner there, we've got grey pug. Next to that is Freya's pug. Down in the bottom left-hand corner is a common pug, and next to that is a narrow-winged pug. But if I'm perfectly honest, the only one that I can confidently ID is the little dog in the middle there. So, as I said before, you don't need a moth trap to see moths. I mean, it helps, particularly if you want to see a lot of moths, but you'd be surprised how many random species turn up, let's say, just to a porch light. And of course, there are many day-flying moths, and a good number of these could turn up in your garden. So here's just a few that I've picked at random. The cinnabar, first of all, the top left there. And you've maybe seen the yellow and black hooped caterpillar that you find on ragwort. Now, I'll occasionally find these moths in the moth trap, but I also tend to see quite a few in the daytime in the wild patch of my garden. To the right of the cinnabar is the yellow shell, smashing little moth. Comes to light, but I usually disturb more when I'm out cutting the lawn and crashing the lawnmower into the hedge. At the fly for a few feet and then settle back down again. The little fella at the bottom there is a micro moth, and that's the horse chestnut leaf miner. You've probably seen the damage that these guys do to the leaves on horse chestnut trees. Tiny moth, I mean, literally a few millimeters long, and quite difficult to see the patterning on them with the naked eye. And then finally, next to that, we've got the red-belted clearwings. So clearwings are wasp mimics, pretty small, easy to misidentify. I occasionally see a currant clearwing or one of these guys in the garden, but the best way to find clearwings is with a pheromone lure trap. And let's just have a look at one of those. So these are red-belted clearwings in a pheromone lure trap. They're very easily attracted to these. I'm not going to spend loads of time talking about pheromone lures because we've had a whole Zoom meeting on this a month or so ago. But suffice to say, if you're interested in seeing clearwing moths and the hornet moths, this is probably the best way to do it. And if you go to the Gloucestershire Moths Facebook group, there's an information section on this and how to attract them in the files section. So, moving on to the Emperor Challenge. Now then, what a fine moth that is, isn't it? If ever a moth deserved its name, it has to be the Emperor moth. Just look at those antennae. Apparently, they can pick up the pheromones of a female from over a mile away, and some sources claim that up to 7 miles. So, beggars belief, frankly, doesn't it? Once again, they're not a commonly seen moth unless you get out onto heathland and moors in April, and even then you may require the assistance of a pheromone lure to attract the males. The males are day flyers, they don't come to light. The females are night flyers, and they do occasionally come to light. I can only think of one instance on the in the county where we've had a female reported at light. So we normally have 5 or 6 reports of emperors a year across the county. But they are about, and they're probably a lot better distributed than we think. They're about the same size as a peacock butterfly, and I've often wondered when a peacock's passed me by whether I've just assumed it is a peacock and maybe it was one of these guys. So that brings me to our Emperor Challenge. Now, so what we've done, I put a little note on the Facebook page to say, you know, let's make an effort to see if we can see how well these guys are distributed. The weather, as I've said before, hasn't been too kind to us this year. So warm, sunny, slightly breezy days, which are perfect for these guys, have been few and far between. Nevertheless, as you can see, we're starting to build up a picture. The red marks on the map indicate a 2 kilometres square in which the moth has been seen so far this year. So I think currently we've got 15 sightings, or at least 15 squares where they've been seen, sometimes more than once. Most of these have been to pheromone lures, but not all. So if you do see an emperor, please let me know so that we can plot it on the map, and we want to try and understand the distribution of this species, because they're clearly not just a moth of heathland. I mean, I've had them in my garden, and as you'll see later on, I live nowhere near heathland, and it's really just arable farmland. So yeah, if you could let us know, much appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to have a look at a few confusion species now. Confused, you will be. So the moth that you see in that picture there is actually called the confused. I could have put another moth there, the uncertain, but you started to get a picture of why moths are quite difficult sometimes to identify. Right, so let's make a start. Okay, so in fairness, we're beginning to come out of the quaker season now, but it might just be worth having a bit of a recap on these. There are still a few around, and we often get queries about what is what. Most of the photos in this section have been sent to me by a guy called Tom Tams, who is the Northumberland County moth recorder. He's got a great web page where you can see more of these type of photos. And I'm very grateful to him for sharing these. So, as I said, on the wing now, quakers or orthosias. Okay, so starting with the common quaker at the top there, pretty much comes in every shade of brown that you can think of, but the general markings are the same. Those big oval and kidney shapes are the standout features on these. The powdered quaker underneath there, yeah, looks similar colouring, but it's a bigger moth. It does have that powdery texture to it as well. It's got a sharper tipped forewings, and the kidney marks are darker too. Small quaker, well, it's smaller, if that's a clue, but you can't always go by size with moths. You always get a runt of the litter. I've had small common quakers and small powdered quakers sometimes, but small quaker, generally smaller. It's got a bit of a kind of an orangey tint to it. It always looks quite speckly to me too. Find lots of these in woodland traps, by the way. If you're moth trapping out in the woods, you can end up with hundreds of these on a good night in April. Blossom underwing, halfway in size between small quaker and common quaker. Much rarer than the other quakers. I actually had one in my garden last month, first time, and I've been trapping for 6 years now. I'm just going to show it off actually because it's a fine looking moth. There we are, blossom underwing. Just pulling it back to this slide. It's got that darker sort of central band there and a general sort of pinkish brown colour. And then at the bottom we've got twin spotted quaker, closest in size probably to the powdered quaker, I guess, but the clue's in the name. Two dark central black spots on the outermost cross line. It's quite a broad looking moth too, occasionally confused with some species of clouded drab. And I don't want to get into separating drabs tonight because there's 3 species of those which are all quite similar too. And then finally, just a quick look at the pugs, and a couple that are very similar, the Brindle pug and the oak tree pug. The Brindle pug tends to have, or it almost always has, these narrow black dashes on the wing there, whereas the oak tree, the black dashes tend to be thicker, and there's usually a white suffusion just to the side of it here. But they're very tricky to distinguish, and it's not something I'm going to spend too much time on. If you've got pugs and you can't identify them, put some pictures up on the Facebook group for us to have a look at, and we'll do our best to identify them for you. But at the end of the day, there are some pugs that you're probably not going to get confirmation of a definite ID. Okay, and then just to show how confusing things can get, here's 6 variations of oak tree pug, all looking similar, but the markings certainly different on some of these. You've got some very obvious oak tree pugs here. You've got the thick black dashes here on the right-hand side middle pug with a white suffusion to the side, where others have got a much narrower black dash and could get confused with brindles quite easily. I'm not going to spend too much time on pugs. Another confusion species until you get your eye in is the swallow prominence. So you've got the lesser swallow prominent and the swallow prominent. When you look at the two of them together there, and these are photos from the Facebook group, they look very similar. What's the difference? We'll have a look at another one of Tom Tams's photos. So lesser swallow prominent, you look at the white wedge at the top of the wing there, extending from the torus, reaching less than halfway to the wing base. So it's quite short, stops halfway down here, and a cream thorax, whereas the swallow prominent, buff thorax, and the white wedge, look how long that is, and it's just tapering out there almost to a pinpoint, going almost the full length of the top of the wing there. Here are both moths seen from above. You've got the swallow prominent on the left-hand side with the long wedge, and the buff thorax, and the lesser swallow prominent there on the right with the cream thorax and this shorter, wider wedge there. And once you've got your eye in on those two features, you should be able to identify these fairly easily. And then I thought we'd just end this section with these two guys. So it can be quite difficult sometimes identifying moths by their features because of the similarity of a lot of them. But we've also get confusion when it comes to names. So here we've got the bright line brown eye on the left and the brown line bright eye on the right. Now they're quite different looking moths, so fairly easy to identify. But you imagine how many people have made a mistake when they've recorded those and written down the name. I bet it happens. So, should we talk about gardening for moths? And I'm not a great gardener, so this shouldn't take me very long at all. Don't. Now, I've taken some of this advice from Butterfly Conservation's website, so don't blame me if you don't agree. But that's very true. If you want to see moths in your garden, the less you do, the better, frankly. Ease off the hard work. Moths and caterpillars, they need fallen leaves, old stems, plant debris to provide a place to spend the winter in. Don't clear up all the time. I've got a couple of mature-ish trees in the front of my garden. One being a Norway maple, and I leave most of the leaves on the ground over winter. They blow into the corners under the hedge, and it's a great place for moths and other insects and larvae, obviously, to spend the winter. Don't cut everything back, you know, this sort of ground zero approach that people have to the garden sometimes. Leave some of it until the spring, and just generally be less tidy. Leave some food for the moths, leave places for them to hide. Many moth caterpillars feed on the native plants we call weeds. Don't pull up all the weeds. Have a wild patch in your lawn or in the corner of your garden. Give them somewhere to hide. And organic gardening, of course, very beneficial for moths and all other wildlife. Ease off the weed killer, please, folks. So try and have a mixture of flowering plants and shrubs in your garden. Small tree if you've got room. Flowers, of course, are great. We all love flowers. Good food source for adult moths, but it's the leafy plants that provide the necessary food for caterpillar. I don't have a lot of flowers in my garden, but there's a lot of greenery. And I guess I'm blessed to have privet and hawthorn hedgerows around the garden, and that does provide a brilliant food source for the moths. So, which brings me on really to my own little theory there, that hedgerows provide ample and varied food source for caterpillars. Yes, they do. But my theory is, are they moth superhighways? This is the sort of an aerial shot of the area where I live. I live at the edge of Staunton and Course Village, down this lane here. If you can see my mouse there, as you can see, there's very few trees around. One thing that's always been said to me, if you want to see a lot of moths, you need plenty of trees. You know, go and trap in a woodland. Make sure you've got oak trees nearby. Well, I've got a lot of trees near me, and I've had nearly 700 species of moths in my garden. And moths really shouldn't be there because the food plant isn't there. So where are they coming from, and how do they get there? I have a theory that moths travel via old and established hedgerows, and you can see the patterns of the fields here, and there's lots of hedgerows running along every field. If you go right to that bottom right hand corner there, you can see the edges of a woodland that expands out into a much bigger woodland there, which is out of the picture. And I just feel that the moths like to, you know, when they're on the move, they'll come out of the woods there, they'll travel along the hedgerows, keeping close to the, you know, to a food source and somewhere to hide from predators, and make a beeline for my garden, basically. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all again soon. Thank you.